If they wanted a welcome, they should have knocked. Instead, they kicked the door off its hinges. Joran Vult didn't raise his voice as he said it. He didn't need to. The overhead lights in the UEC bunker flickered for a half-second as another orbital relay went offline, another sensor silenced, another eye gouged out in the dark above Earth. Somewhere in orbit, pieces of metal the size of skyscrapers tumbled in vacuum silence. Down here, a low hum of emergency servers and filtered air was all that remained between strategy and surrender. He stood before the primary wall display, the room behind him a blur of operators in military fatigues and sweat-stained undershirts. The screen pulsed with static, interrupted only by jagged lines of corrupted telemetry. No one spoke. No one chewed gum. No one even sipped coffee anymore. There was nothing left to pretend normalcy for. Then the transmission came. A ripple through every surface. Consoles flickered, radios spat static, monitors rebooted in unison. A droning voice layered with subharmonic pulses filled the bunker. "We are the Tar-Scan Dominion. You are fractured. Your defenses are obsolete. Your surrender will be processed within the standard solar cycle. Resistance will result in species-level asset liquidation." The voice was devoid of breath, emotion, or even aggression. It didn't threaten, it informed. A deep exhale escaped from Drenvor, the youngest technician in the room, hands trembling as he typed commands into a terminal to stabilize the input feed. "Loop the message," Director Halvin Merrick ordered, stepping up behind Joran. "I want it playing in every capital, every briefing room, every secure channel. The whole damn planet needs to feel it." Joran's jaw clenched as the display zoomed out to show the moon. Orbiting it was a lattice of motion, gray and blue vessels gliding in perfect synchronicity. Not hundreds, thousands. They'd come with no diplomats, no preliminary signals, no detectable propulsion trails. Just appeared. The day had no name. People just called it the eclipse, even though it wasn't one. The moon didn't cast darkness on Earth. They did. "I count 1,018 distinct hulls," Dren murmured. "All positioned in geosynced orbits above the dark side. They're not moving erratically. They're waiting." "Waiting for what?" someone asked from the back. Joran didn't answer. He was already tracing lines between several ship positions with his finger, eyes narrowing. 2 hours later, Earth's governments fractured like thin glass under pressure. The Chinese Council declared intent to negotiate independently. The North American Confederacy debated invoking the Strategic Withdrawal Clause. Essentially, selective surrender. Europe was silent, locked in closed-door sessions. Merrick called the meeting into the main briefing hall. Screens flickered with diplomatic feeds, blurred faces, raised voices, collapsing trust. "They want laborers," someone muttered. "They didn't fire on civilians. Yet, this could be our way to minimize damage." "No," Joran said coldly. "They did fire on civilians." He tapped his tablet. The screen changed to satellite footage, grainy infrared imaging. 2 hours ago, a directed energy blast from orbit struck the Atacama Desert. Heat signatures crossed 5,000 Kelvin, glassed a 30-mile radius. Immediate casualties, unknown. But nearby observatories are gone. Geological sensors spiked across the region. Merrick stepped forward, voice like gravel under boots. "And that's not all. The Antarctic ice shelf has destabilized. One of their secondary beams carved a path through polar terrain. Glacial collapse in progress. Tidal models are already shifting." "So it begins," someone muttered. "No," Joran corrected. "That was the part where they smiled before swinging." Later that evening, Joran walked alone through the lower levels of the bunker and stepped into the auxiliary tram headed to the edge of the secure zone. Clearance override. Granted. The automated doors hissed open, revealing what was left of the Colorado Valley. The blast hadn't hit here, but the wave from one of the kinetic detonations in low orbit had broken through upper atmosphere layers like a sledgehammer. The result was wind shear at hurricane force. Power lines gone, glass from windows embedded in tree trunks, and worse. Joran walked the path toward what used to be his childhood neighborhood, or at least where it had been. No smell remained. Whatever scent might have lingered from burned rubber, insulation, or even pine sap had been sterilized by heat and dust. Only the sound of loose gravel shifting beneath his boots broke the dead air. He crouched down, sifting through fragments. A bent number plate. A plastic dinosaur melted into blacktop. A concrete step that once led into a porch. His fingers paused on it, worn smooth, right where a child's foot might have landed 1,000 times before. He said nothing. No tears. Just one long, controlled exhale. Back at the command table, hours later, Joran stared at the fleet projection again. Merrick entered without announcement, tossing a flask onto the table. "You drink?" the director asked. Jor didn't look away. "Only when we win." Marek grunted and leaned forward. "You've seen something? That look in your eyes. Speak." Joran didn't answer right away. He shifted the projection view, isolating 3 clusters of tar-scanned ships. Then he overlaid a different data set, pulse intervals from their shield patterns. Small spikes, once every 7 seconds. Repeating. In harmony. "They're not reacting independently," Joran said, "not even using distributed control systems. They're linked. All their shield calibration signals are coming from a single origin point." Marek's eyes narrowed. "A command beacon?" "Not just a beacon," Joran replied. "A single ship. Every other vessel is syncing its reactions, shield compensation, and target data to it. It's how they scale their formations, how they optimize power. It's not redundancy, it's total control. You sever that cord." He paused, letting the silence speak. Merrick whispered, "You blind the hive." Joran finally took the flask. He didn't drink from it, just held it, grounding himself. And they'll never see it coming. The command chamber stank of sweat and battery acid. Flickering blue backlights illuminated half-shaved men hunched over comm stations, their faces hollowed by hours of static, dread, and caffeine. Everything above ground had gone quiet. Cities dimmed, satellites inert, oceans heating by inches. Joran Val stood motionless in front of the display wall, eyes tracing the pulsing rhythm of the Tarskan formation, like a chess player watching a locked-in opponent blink for the first time. "Every 7 seconds, he muttered. "Shield fluctuations, response pings, aim calibration. It all loops back to a single frequency anchor." Behind him, Major Corvin Jask let out a low, skeptical grunt. "You're telling me an empire that crossed light years put all its eggs in one glorified transmitter?" "No," Joran said flatly. "I'm telling you they built a system so efficient it never anticipated failure." Jask crossed his arms, square-jawed and stone-eyed, the kind of man who'd earned more scars than rank bars. "Or maybe you're seeing patterns in fog. You want to gamble Earth on a hunch?" Joran turned. "No. I want to gamble Earth on the only thing we have that's more dangerous than a hunch. Desperation paired with data." The room went silent again. Then came the sirens. Sharp, discordant, rising in spirals, red lighting washed the chamber in urgency. A technician stood up too fast, his chair slamming the floor behind him. "Drone wave breached Oslo's eastern grid, 47% power loss," someone reported. "Hydro dam automation compromised. They're spidering through water control nodes." "They're not targeting cities anymore," Merrick said, striding in. "They're targeting functions, water, power, food distribution. And no kinetic strikes, yet," Jask added. "They want Earth screaming, not dead." 2 levels below, in the repurposed subterranean R&D lab, it was even darker. The air smelled like solder smoke, steel dust, and ozone. Engineer Thal Bricks moved like a man on the brink of collapse, his long fingers darting over console interfaces while diagnostics crawled across transparent displays. Laid out in front of him was the jagged, blackened husk of a Tarscon reconnaissance drone, one of the few that hadn't vaporized on shutdown. Drone core's intact, but the software's recursive, keeps erasing itself, Thal explained, barely pausing to breathe. Signal receiver's alive, though. Quantum link. Narrow bandwidth, very efficient, but... Joran prompted, stepping closer. Thal pointed to a curved glass coil glowing faintly in the center. If you oversaturate the carrier frequency, the receiver dumps the feed, collapses the signal. That means we could blind them. Thal nodded, then immediately shook his head. Only briefly. Seconds, maybe less. Their quantum routing auto-fails to backups, unless we jam all routing nodes at once. For that, we'd need... He trailed off. Joran filled it in for him. Paw, unthinkable output, precision targeting, no visible deployment. Exactly. Thal leaned on the console. And if we broadcast from military installations, they'll spot us before we calibrate. If we use satellites, they'll see the lens arrays charging. What about scientific arrays? Joran asked, eyes narrowing. Telescopes, particle accelerators, the deep field stuff they think isn't connected to our defense net. Thal blinked, then began pacing. Maybe Atacama, CA Tour, Mauna Kea, Baikal Array. If we mask the emissions as cosmic radiation studies or quantum sampling bursts, Joran turned to Marek. We need black site access, total global sync, and enough cover traffic to keep them guessing. Marek didn't speak for a moment. Then he simply said, "Do it." But not everyone was on board. Later that evening, inside a smaller, sealed war room, the debate unfolded beneath low halogen strips and the slow grind of distant backup generators. No press, no live streams, just the 5 men who still controlled Earth's last unified defense structure. This is suicide, Jask said bluntly, slapping a folder onto the desk. You're pulling global scientific infrastructure into a military operation that has a less than theoretical success rate. Marek didn't flinch. What's your alternative? Jask folded his arms. Parley, partial concession. Send a diplomatic crew and a civilian shuttle. No weapons, just a translation rig. We surrender grid access, maybe offer energy mining rights, buy ourselves time. Time to what? Joran cut in. His voice didn't rise, but something in the air shifted, like frost creeping down the spine. My son, he said, was at a research facility just outside Novaya Zemlya. Not a military target, not even power critical. It was hit at 300, no warning, no survivors. He reached into his coat, withdrew a battered memory module, and set it gently on the desk. A screen flickered on. Static resolved into a smiling boy, maybe 10 years old, holding up a mangled snow sled. Then came the timestamp, then the flash. The silence that followed could have drowned an army. I'm not here to trade time, Joran said, voice quiet. I'm here to take theirs. The planning began before midnight. In the underground war lab, cables ran like veins from server banks to portable data cores. World maps glowed on the far wall, and under each red dot, Atacama, Geneva, Siberia, Hawaii. Teams were already being assembled. No uniforms, no ranks, just physicists, tech engineers, and quiet men with trembling hands. All outlined the pulse theory with digital overlays. We won't just hit their drones. We hit their protocols, oversaturate their bandwidth across 3 signal harmonics. That locks them in a feedback loop, enough to give us maybe 30 seconds of blindness. 30 seconds is an eternity, Joran muttered. Long enough to plan something worse. Marek entered with a final tablet. The Council won't back this. They're preparing to issue a unified broadcast of surrender conditions within the week. Then we stay off their map, Joran said. until it's too late to stop us. He walked out of the room before anyone could reply. Alone, in his quarters, Joran sat beside a cold LED terminal. He inserted the memory chip. The screen lit up with an old family comm log. His son's voice echoed, excited, asking about the stars. His wife's laugh followed, a short burst of joy he hadn't heard in over a year. Their faces were whole in the flickering light. He didn't cry, he didn't blink. He just whispered to no one in particular. We asked nicely, we let them speak. We waited. Then, like a man sealing a vault, he turned off the screen. An hour later, Marek entered the war room. Most of the lights were dimmed. A projection of the Tarscan formation hovered like a frozen storm above the table. He looked at Joran. We green-lighted Atacama and CERN. Swiss teams prepping phase modulation. Chilean station just confirmed signal rigging will be in place within 72 hours. Joran straightened. What's our operational tag? Marek cracked the faintest grin. We're calling it Echo Fuse. He turned to leave, then paused. If we die, Marek began. It won't be politely, Joran finished. And the room went dark behind them. The wind over Atacama howled like a warning. Dust rolled in low sheets across the cracked earth as the observatory's steel gate closed behind Joran Vault. The sky above was a brilliant, savage blue, uncut by clouds, streaked only by the pale crescent of the moon, where death still hung in orbit. Joran adjusted his collar and moved down the ramp into the reinforced tunnel beneath the telescope complex. Chilean contractors had poured fresh cement, still reeking of lime and silica. Overhead, cables clung like black veins to the walls, feeding power to the subterranean core, where the pulse rig was being welded into place. The bunker smelled of ozone, welding gas, and something else, fear, thick and metallic on the tongue. Inside, work teams in mismatched gear hunched over instruments once meant to listen to stars. Now, they were rewired to scream. At the center stood Derek Naum, a balding astrophysicist with ink-stained fingertips and dark rings under his eyes. He barely glanced up as Joran approached. There. They built this place to find galaxies forming on the edge of time, Naum said, voice low. Now we're hijacking it to blind a reptilian death cult. Hell of a legacy. Joran nodded. Stars will understand. EMP phase coils are synced, Naum added, tapping a control node. We've masked the power draw inside routine test logs. To anyone scanning our emissions, it'll look like an atmospheric distortion experiment. And the signal routing? Split 3 ways. One pulse across visible Y, another embedded in microwave echo. Last one's writing cosmic background noise. It'll look like static to them until they choke on it. Joran rested a hand on the chilled steel frame beside him. It doesn't have to look like war. Not until they're blind. Thousands of miles away, under the Swiss Alps, Captain Ulrich Fenn ran a different kind of operation. Inside CERN's abandoned magnetic tunnel, cleared of civilian staff and reinforced under emergency secrecy, engineers in thick gloves worked in bursts of silence, lit by the stuttering flicker of work lamps. The tunnel echoed like a cathedral stripped bare. Ulrich paced beside the central control rig, a tablet in one hand and a sidearm in the other. He wasn't military by origin. He'd been a logistics officer during the Arctic oil raids, but he knew how to make chaos useful. His boots echoed off steel as he approached his comms officer. Update, he said curtly. All test bursts came back stable. No spikes. The Dominion hasn't pinged our signal patterns. And the particle coil deviation? Within parameters. If we fire now, we burn out half the system, but it'll work. Ulrich tapped his headset. Send it to Vault, and remind the Chilean team we're their mirror. If they blink out of sync, we fail. Above ground, the story was different. News anchors spoke in calm tones. Translations of pending diplomatic dialogue scrolled beneath their faces. Officials in tailored suits gave vague statements about active peace frameworks. There were even clips of satellites being deployed. Not real, of course. Edited footage. Launches had been scrubbed for months. But the truth ran beneath it all. In Greenland, automated missile silos launched dummy payloads, cheap aluminum shells with chemical burners, to simulate weapons testing. In Alaska, heat decoys faked engine ignitions. And in northern India, high-altitude aircraft scattered reflective particulates to mimic cloaked propulsion signatures. Every move Earth made now was theater. The Dominion watched from above, calculated, observed, judged, but never saw. That was the point. Back underground in Chile, the walls dripped with condensation. Power lines hummed with barely contained charge. A young technician, barely 20, name unreadable under his coat, rushed past Derek Nam and tried to storm toward the exit. Joran intercepted him near the loading ramp. "I'm done," the boy said, voice cracking. "They know. They're watching everything. If we fire, they'll retaliate. Before we can even finish the signal." "Where will you run?" Joran asked quietly. The technician's breathing was shallow, panicked. "Anywhere's better than here when the sky falls." Joran didn't move. Didn't grab him. Just stood there. Silent. Grounded. "I had a wife," he said, not raising his voice. "A son. They believed our governments would find peace, that the Tarskins wanted submission, not extinction. They didn't run." The boy looked down, eyes flooding, throat locking up. Joran stepped closer. "You think I believe we all walk away from this?" The words hung in the humid air. "I don't," Joran whispered. "But I'm staying, not for peace, not for survival, because they already took what mattered, and I refuse to let them decide the rest." The boy stared a moment longer, then nodded once and walked back into the facility without another word. That night, inside the Atacama Hub's main rig chamber, the final systems came online. Monitors glowed, calibration graphs scrolled endlessly. Control staff barely spoke now. Each keystroke, each breath mattered. Outside, the desert wind shrieked like something primal. Nam ran a finger over the side of the signal module. "Everything's aligned. CERN, Bicol, Mauna Kea. They're locked and awaiting synchronization. If we miss the window." "We won't," Joran said. "And if we do?" Joran glanced at the ceiling, as if he could see through stone, through sky, up to the waiting fangs in orbit. "Then we're already ghosts." In Geneva, Captain Ulrich Fenn stood in front of his command table, surrounded by silent operators, watching the global sync timer tick down from 48 hours. "Final dummy strikes will deploy every 8 hours, Ulrich said. "Thermal decoys will mimic propulsion flares. Public channels will leak fake countdowns. We don't show our hand." One operator raised his head. "Sir, what if they change formation? If they move before the pulse hits?" Ulrich's voice dropped to steel. "Then we scramble fighters from the underside of the world and hit them in the teeth with everything we've got. But until then, we pretend we're negotiating." He pointed at the timer. "When that hits 0, we remind them we weren't born to bow." In Chile, as the sync timer updated globally, a red light bathed the Atacama chamber in silent approval. Nam spoke into the comlink. "Switzerland's confirms calibration. Siberia reports stable atmospheric diffraction. All systems are tuned." Joran stepped forward and entered his override code. Echo fuse. Standby mode countdown initiated. Across the planet, lights blinked green, one by one, beneath flags that no longer mattered. Joran exhaled. He didn't look up when Nam asked, "How long before they know?" "They'll know the moment it's too late." The countdown struck 0 at 3:00 UTC. Atacama, CERN, Mauna Kea, and Bicol fired simultaneously. No sound echoed, no bright lights split the sky, just a wave A high bandwidth surge encoded through layered frequencies, masked in radiation, threaded through ghost signals, pierced Earth's atmosphere and reached into orbit. To the average citizen, nothing changed. Lights didn't flicker, phones didn't buzz. But high above the surface, where silver-gray death had lingered for weeks, everything changed. In lower stratosphere above Cairo, 7 Tarscan drones spun mid-flight. Their hulls shimmered with heat vents as they patrolled known data towers. One flickered, then another. Then they all stopped mid-air, like flies forgetting how to hover. Without warning, they dropped. Steel thunder roared as 2 smashed through a banking tower, leveling glass and frame in an instant. Another punched a crater into the city's reservoir wall, sending torrents into alleyways. But the remaining 4 slammed down onto open streets, gouging asphalt but sparing the living. Across the planet, it was the same. Beijing, Vancouver, Lagos, Berlin. Drones folded from the sky like dying birds. Some burst in midair from signal implosion. Others crashed intact, leaving black scars in fields, oceans, and deserts. In Mumbai, a beach playground lay silent at dawn, until a drone's spiraling wreckage landed just short of the jungle gym. The children, frozen in shock, were untouched. Inside the UEC war bunker, the atmosphere had shifted from grim to stunned. The wall displays exploded with blinking red X's. Drone losses, active feeds froze. Surveillance channels erupted with alerts. And then, green. Not many, not for long, but green. Earth systems flickering back to life. Joran stood motionless as the initial sweep came through. His pulse didn't spike. His voice remained steady. Status? Technician Vor replied with dry shock. Network pings re-established in 6 major hubs. Comms relays in Australia and Alaska are back online. Power nodes are syncing. It's not full restoration, but it's breathing again. Director Merrick leaned closer to the tactical board, watching the Dominion icons ripple, flicker, reform. They're not just blind, he muttered. They're confused. Far above, in one of the command ships orbiting the dark side of the moon, the Tarscan drone control bay was chaos in monochrome. A dozen reptilian officers hissed in overlapping dialects, clicking their vocal relays as they scanned failing response loops. The central coordinator, taller, bone-crest-ridged, gray-scaled, gripped the edge of the command console with taloned hands. His secondary eyes blinked in rapid succession as he processed the fault data. The central screen pulsed. Drone Sector 3. A. Unit failure. Link disrupted. Suggest sync loss. Shield collaboration interrupted. Core network signal unknown. Human trickery, one of the aides growled, tongue rasping against his teeth. The coordinator turned sharply. Negative. No thermal trace. No launch signatures. No kinetic outputs. This was environmental? A pulse? A ghost. The coordinator barked a command. Deploy Skycraft. Wideband recon. Trace all anomalous emissions. Their species had engineered supremacy through precision, through order. But Earth had just introduced disorder. Joran stood at the rear wall of the control deck, watching global feeds cascade in bursts. He tapped a frozen surveillance frame from East Jakarta, an elementary school 6 minutes prior. Blurred children huddled under a plastic awning, staring at the smoking crater just yards away. Twisted drone parts jutted like bones from the ground. You see this? He whispered. No one answered. These things took the skies, took cities, took families, and all it took to stop them was 30 seconds of blindness. His voice was quiet, but each syllable struck hard. In Geneva, Captain Ulrich Fenn barked commands over the scramble network. At the next decoy run, no need to provoke response. Instead, deploy reflection nodes across Alps and Pyrenees. Let them think the pulse originated from a solar flare bounce. Mask us with their own curiosity. A lieutenant to his right tapped in new coordinates. Dominion has launched atmospheric sweepers, non-lethal recon, scanners not bombers. They're looking for origin points, Oryx said, which means they're afraid of another strike. He smiled grimly. Let's not give them one. Yet. Back in Atacama, Derek Nam reclined in the cold metal chair, exhaling for the first time in 2 days. We actually did it, he whispered, staring at the diagnostic feed. We punched a hole in the dark. His knuckles trembled as he reached for a thermos. The taste of stale coffee had never been so human. Joran stood beside him, eyes locked on the satellite uplink. Keep logging Tarscan drone frequencies. The instant they shift protocols, I want new baselines pulled. You think they'll fix it that fast? They don't have to. They just have to adapt faster than we hit them. Silence passed. Noam looked up. And if they do? Joran turned, gaze steady. Then we stop hiding. The moment of clarity came during a low-orbit surveillance report, one of the few satellites that had blinked back to life. Anomalous movement on the command ship. Looks like hull restructuring, Vor said. They're pulling auxiliary shielding inward. Maybe reinforcing their core systems. Marek watched the feed. They know what we tried. They don't know how, but they're reinforcing the source. Joran didn't look up. Because they think it's over. Marek raised a brow. It's not? No, Joran replied. It was the opening. He walked over to the secure command terminal. His override key hung from his neck. He inserted it without ceremony. Bring up Operation Gravemind, he ordered. A second screen lit up. Schematics. Shuttle trajectories. Stealth patterns across lunar debris. Marek frowned. You're activating the strike team? We've got the window, Joran said. Their sensor net is fractured. Their command ship is reacting, not watching. We haven't field-tested the antimatter charges. Their exhaust ports may... I know, Joran cut in. But it's now or never. Before they recalibrate. Before they learn. The room fell silent again. Marek stepped forward slowly. You're sure this is the move? Joran's reply was iron. They blinded the Earth to show dominance. We just returned the favor. Now it's our turn to reach into the dark and rip something out. He turned to Vor. Alert all insertion teams, we go tonight. The dark side of the moon was not black. It was dead. Gray light from Earth barely reached this far, and the sun's distant blaze never touched the twisted orbits of the lunar debris field. Broken satellites, shattered probe hulls, and rusting orbit trash drifted in slow arcs like a graveyard in orbit. It was here, among the bones of Earth's past ambition, that humanity's retaliation took shape. 3 stealth mining shuttles, painted with ceramic burn matte and cooled to below ambient, crept through that silence. Inside the lead vessel, Commander Arvid Naskin studied the black ahead. Not through windows, but through thermal overlays and fragment map charts projected in red ghost light across his visor. A mining pilot by trade, Naskin was old school, weathered face, cracked knuckles, and a quiet fatalism carved into his voice. His co-pilot adjusted a rotational thruster with a soft hiss. Drift is clean, 5 meters, right of orbital lane. Naskin's voice was low. Good. Stay invisible, stay broken. They don't scan for junk. Behind them, 2 more shuttles mirrored their movement, barely visible between pockets of shattered lunar rock and derelict defense platforms left from Earth's old kinetic net. The debris was their shield, the silence, their weapon. In the second vessel, Operative Marn Velik crouched beside the antimatter core casing, tightening the magnetic clamps with shaking hands. The warhead was small, barely the size of a suitcase, but dense with death. Reverse-engineered from captured Tarscan wreckage, it pulsed softly with internal containment fields. The case hummed at a frequency too low to hear, but Velik could feel it through his ribs. He reached into his flight suit and pulled out a worn dog tag, etched with a name, Terran Velik. His brother, the corporal lost in the first kinetic strike on orbit. One of the early ones, no remains, just a name logged into Earth's casualty archive. Velik held the tag against his forehead, eyes closed. Not for peace. For you. The formation neared the outer edge of the Tarscan command vessel's shield radius. From afar, the ship looked less like a battleship and more like an ancient temple, wide, symmetrical, layered with rotating rings and monolithic fins of black alloy, punctuated with heat vents, glowing veins of antimatter channels, and hard angles no human design would ever replicate. Commander Naskin's voice crackled in encrypted comms. Final approach begins in 90 seconds. Prep burn protocols. Charges ready. Confirmed. Velik's voice returned. Calm now. Charge 1 locked. Second course spooling. Then came the warning tone, high-pitched and sharp. Thermal ping, one pilot said. Patrol vector, approaching starboard sector. We've been brushed by a search arc. Naskin leaned forward. He knew what had to happen before anyone spoke it. We've got one shot, his co-pilot said quietly. If they trace us. They'll trace us to the team carrying both detonators, Naskin cut in. A pause. Then Naskin toggled to open channel. Shuttle 3, follow me. We're breaking pattern. From Joran's war table back on Earth, the shift was immediate. Why the vector change? Marek demanded. Dvor scanned the live overlay. Shuttle 1 has peeled off from main insertion path. No signal loss. It's intentional. Joran's eyes locked on the glowing arc. They're drawing the patrol. In orbit, the silence of space broke. Naskin's shuttle powered up just enough to flare on Tarscan scans. A wide heat bloom bloomed like a flare in the void. The response was immediate. 3 interceptor drones arced down from the outer Tarscan escort ring, closing in like wolves. Inside the shuttle, Naskin's co-pilot set the final timer. 30 seconds until detonation. Naskin closed his eyes, remembering something soft. His daughter's voice, the time she said he smelled like engine grease and clouds. He smiled. And then? White light. Back in the debris, the remaining 2 shuttles dropped all active propulsion, letting the blast distortion mask their heat. Inside the lead strike vessel, Velik braced himself. The shockwave rattled the hull, but didn't breach it. The Tarscan redirected their attention toward the decoy. 3 drones gone to static, 2 patrol ships redeployed. But the hole in their net had been made. Windows open, Velik whispered. Godspeed, Arvid. They coasted forward. Approach vectors adjusted with surgical timing. Velik's shuttle spiraled through a ventilation shaft. One of the main exhaust ports on the command ship's stern. It was massive, unshielded, and nearly 2 kilometers long. It cycled every 6 minutes, venting heat and reactor byproducts in shimmering bursts of violet steam. They had 30 seconds to enter between vent cycles. Pilot voice, timing, mark, go. The shuttle tilted, inverted, and cut all non-essential power. Inside, gravity slipped sideways. Velik's feet left the deck slightly as the shuttle floated into the vent shaft like a leaf on a current. The air inside was thin, metallic, and humming. They hovered exactly 240 meters inward. Velik crawled into the drop hatch. Cold air blasted his helmet as he stepped into vacuum. Using magnetic gloves, he secured the antimatter casing to the inner wall. Every movement was deliberate, slow, like an ancient ritual. A ritual for endings. Second casing. Mounted opposite, timing fuses synced, detonators checked, safety locks undone. He stepped back and stared. This was the kill shot. Inside the shuttle, the pilot's voice cut through. Tarscan sensor sweeping again, time's up. Go, Velik said. Get distance. I'll trigger from the secondary pod. The pilot hesitated. That wasn't the plan. It is now. Before the pilot could argue, Velik sealed the pod door and pushed off. He floated toward the auxiliary console, leaving the warheads behind. He activated the link, locked the signal, and watched the timer tick. 010, 009, 008. He reached into his flight suit, pulled out the dog tag again, and gripped it tight. No last words, no screams, just breath. Steady. 003, 002, 001. Above the moon, light bloomed like a wound torn open. The Tarscan command vessel shuddered as its entire aft segment ruptured. One by one, the orbiting ships flickered, shields failing, sync loops collapsing. Inside the Earth war bunker, Vor gasped. "We hit it. The command core is down." Joran didn't blink. "Patch me to strike teams, launch fighters, now." Merrick raised his head. "What just happened?" Joran's voice was steady as stone. "We broke the moon path. For 3 seconds, the moon looked like it had been carved open." The detonation inside the Tarscan command vessel ruptured through space like a silent scream. A fissure of white light tore across its superstructure, venting pressurized plasma and hurling fragments the size of stadiums into the dark. The aftershock rippled through their entire formation, ships blinking out of sync, shields collapsing mid-second, some colliding with each other as navigation controls stuttered and failed. In Earth's skies, the stars hadn't moved, but the threat among them had just stumbled. Inside the UEC war bunker, alarms didn't sound. They were muted by design. Too much noise in war kills clarity. But on the main tactical display, Joran Volt saw what he'd waited weeks to see. Tarscan shields. Offline. He didn't smile. "Are the launch crews ready?" Director Merrick stepped forward, headset angled over one ear. 3 silos, confirmed ignition. Suborbital ramps in the Pacific waking up now. Give them the green light, full launch, target by angle of disruption. No pattern strikes. They'll adjust if they recognize rhythm. Vor called out from the secondary screen, voice tight. "Comm line from Carrier Ulysses. Commander Dex Harlan on deck." Joran nodded once. "Patch him." Inside the Ulysses, a repurposed orbital carrier hidden beneath the Pacific for almost a decade, Commander Dex Harlan gripped the restraint rails of the launch platform. Behind him, a dozen hypersonic fighters gleamed with frost, engines ticking as they transitioned from cryo-idle to live ignition. Harlan was 40, square-jawed, sharp-eyed, and already soaked with sweat beneath his flight suit. He had flown during the Jovian trade skirmishes and survived the lunar skiff collapse. But nothing looked like what hung above him now. "Tarscat formations folding," he said into his comm. "They're exposed, their flanks wide open, but those hulls are still running hot. One pass too close and you melt." Joran's voice came through clear. "You don't need to get close, just fast." "I've got fast," Harlan said. "What I don't have are backup wings." "You won't get them," Joran said. "You're it." Harlan stared through the carrier's angled viewport. "Then tell command," he paused, breath catching. "We're not asking any more." The first wave launched like spears hurled into the void. 12 fighters roared from hidden ports, carving vapor trails across the exosphere. They didn't glow, they burned cold. Their black skin composite hulls shimmered in atmosphere, then vanished as they pierced orbital shadow. They hit the Tarscan rear wall at Mach 14. Inside the lead ship, Harlan's co-pilot called out targets. "Primary gunships losing alignment. Firing windows are rotating slow. Something's jammed in their coordination grid." Harlan locked missiles, then throttled his seat forward. "Ride the chaos, no mercy, no caution. This isn't a warning shot." 2 missiles screamed ahead, cutting past a Tarscan flanker. The first tore through its side plating, the second slammed the reactor core. 1 second later, the gunship bloomed outward, sending shredded plating across the battlefield. But Earth paid its price. The second wave came under coordinated fire. A pulse turret locked onto a Terran fighter, too slow on its turn. The hull flash vaporized, no wreckage, no remains. Another was clipped by hull debris, sent tumbling in a long, untraceable arc into the moon's dark side. Harlan saw the loss. Every one. Inside the war bunker, Joran redirected vectors in real time. Pull Wing 3 south of lunar axis. Create a pincer between flanker debris and the core wreckage. Use the gravity curl from the command vessel's detonation to slingshot above their patrol ships. Vor blinked. Slingshot? That close? They're destabilized, Joran said. They won't track fast enough to correct. This is how we learn if they bleed. Of the moon, the fight became chaos. Tarscan vessels were built for symmetry, smooth rotation, unified aim, shared vision. But now, with no central core, they fought blind. They overcorrected. Their formation fractured. One cruiser tilted into its own ally's vent path. The second tried to retreat and struck its own recon drone cloud. Explosions began stacking, each one not just damage, but confusion. Earth's fighters weaved between wreckage like knives through falling leaves. Harlan's HUD blinked red again. Another wingman lost. He didn't flinch. Fire left, veer spin, dump reserves and roll. His fighter twisted under gravity strain, popping into position behind a slower enemy vessel. The Tarscan's turret rotated. Too slow. One shot, one breach. The enemy drifted into lunar shadow and detonated without light. In Chile, Derek Nam sat in the darkened comm room, watching a single monitor. No feed, no broadcast, just a heartbeat line of battle losses and distance markers. 3 ships left in formation, cluster gamma, he whispered. Make it 2, said an operator beside him. He exhaled. We're not spectators anymore. Back in the sky, the final push came from below. Earth's remaining launch hangars fired their reserves. 6 final fighters from Iceland, 2 from beneath Siberia, and 1 ancient dual genie from Antarctica's forgotten base. All flew upward, with no recovery planned. The goal was simple: cripple the Tarscan drive cores. Harlan was already 2 steps ahead. Relay this to bunker command, he barked. I'm diverting to the core vessel cluster. They've restabilized navigation but are still relying on auxiliary thrusters. I can see the rotational lag. Deck, you go in now, there's no pullback vector, his co-pilot warned. There's no Earth to pull back to if we don't. He jammed the throttle. The final run felt like falling into a furnace. Tarscan flares launched across his path, white-hot seeking heat trails. He cut power, coasted in near-dead silence. Plating buckled, shields strained. Then, open hull. He dropped his final payload. 2 seconds. The impact. A split formed across the core ship's rear. Plasma surged out like fire escaping a coffin. Hull fracturing, joints ripping. He pulled away on rotational bursts, no main engine. Behind him, the Tarscan fleet folded, not just from damage, but from realization. They were losing. They weren't invincible. And Earth? Earth fought. In the UEC bunker, Vor stood breathless. They're retreating. Joran didn't react. Track them. Closest ships. What direction? Vor paused. Outbound. Mars orbit. Marek leaned in. You think they'll regroup there? Joran turned to the screen. Debris burned above the moon like ash hanging in a sky no wind could touch. They'll try, but now they know something we didn't need to say. Joran's voice was low, cold, final. We're not theirs, we never were. The moon was still burning when the war ended. Wreckage hung above its surface like orbiting cinders. Hulks of broken Tarscan warships spinning slowly, their heat trails vanishing into vacuum. The battlefield had gone quiet, but it wasn't peace. It was pause. Earth wasn't celebrating. It was counting. Inside the newly established Global Defense Council complex, built in the reinforced shell of the old Geneva Space Assembly, Joran Vault stood before a window layered with ceramic shielding. Below, The ground crews were laying out foundation lines for a new orbital monitoring grid. No applause, no speeches, just floodlights, steel, and silence. Behind him, the door hissed open. Archivist Ren Toll entered with a hard case slung over his shoulder, and dust streaked across his face like war paint. Toll was wiry, gray-bearded, and moved with the twitchy energy of a man who'd lived inside machines more than rooms. "They tried to wipe everything," he said. "Black protocols, recursive ciphers, even microfission in the command storage nodes. But they didn't count on power loss mid-wipe." Joran didn't turn around. "What did we get?" Tool unlatched the case, revealing a curved crystalline shard, no bigger than a hand mirror. A faint shimmer moved across it, alien script flashing, rotating, vanishing. "This is their map," Toll said. "Not of space, of control." Later that day, inside the command chamber, the senior council gathered. Projected overhead was a galactic spiral, not in human notation, but decoded into readable clusters. Toll walked them through it, pacing slowly, pointer in hand. Red sectors, confirmed Tarscan dominion. Blue, outer colonies. Yellow, fractured zones. These here, he tapped a blinking green node, aren't loyal, not even in name. Duran stepped in. "They don't rule by strength, they rule by illusion, projection of uniform control. But the fracture points are real, they're barely holding their own leash." Director Marek crossed his arms. "So we didn't just break their fleet, we cracked their story." Joran nodded, and now they know it. The first Tarscan transmission came 2 days later. It wasn't a demand, not even a retaliation plan. It was a statement, translated across every channel Earth could access. "You have demonstrated capacity beyond expectation. Retaliation is no longer the protocol. Adjustment will follow. Observation will continue. But understand, violence is not over. We have seen your shadow." It was both threat and respect, a promise of future tension, a grudging nod that humanity now had weight in the equation. No reply was issued. Not yet. In orbit, beneath what was once a kinetic defense net, recovery ships hauled the remains of destroyed Tarscan vessels into reinforced bays. Inside one of them, cold, silent, and reeking of vacuum-flashed alloys, Earth's engineers dissected technology centuries ahead of their own, no longer reverse engineering blindly. Now they knew what to look for. Adaptive AI that learned aggression levels per atmospheric composition. Stealth layering built not for speed, but stillness. Quantum jammers designed to disrupt planetary field harmonics, now being reassembled into defensive nets for Earth's own orbit. In the command lab, Ren Toll flipped through holograms of the Dominion's civilian hierarchy. "They weren't meant for long wars," he said. "Their structure's too rigid, too dependent on central command. You cut the brain, the arms flail." "They didn't think we'd bite," Jorlin replied. "Now, they have to rethink their entire doctrine." Toll gave him a sideways glance. "And ours?" Joran walked to the edge of the table, pulled up a new file. "Earth's satellite relay plan? Every orbit line, every stealth node, every listening post." He tapped each sector, activating layers of cloaked tracking stations, automated threat triangulation, and newly drafted Terran orbital codes. "No more waiting. We listen for shifts, and if we hear the Dominion prepping anything, we preempt," Toll finished. "Exactly." Inside the personal quarters designated to him, Spartan walls, 2 chairs, 1 steel cot. Joran sat with the data crystal balanced in his hand. The light inside shifted with every tilt. He'd watched it for nearly an hour, alone. Inside that tiny sliver of tech lived the truth. The Tarskans weren't gods, weren't unified, weren't inevitable. They were empires, like any other, and empires could crack. He tapped the console beside him and played the fragment of his family's last recorded transmission. Not the whole thing, just 5 seconds. His son's voice, laughing, saying he wanted to build a ship one day. "I will," Jordan whispered, "but not the kind you dreamed." At the orbital development station high above Greenland, human engineers worked in zero-G silence. Their hands glided over new frames, satellites that would never blink, never sleep. Tiny stealth crafts the size of vending machines, capable of riding the orbit of any moon, any planet, without trace. No more praying someone noticed. Now, Earth watched. And behind those platforms were AI cores, not for attack, for adaptation. Systems that would rewrite protocols mid-conflict, turn enemy signal logic against itself. Earth had learned from their attackers, and Earth had changed. 3 days later, in a locked war chamber beneath the Pacific Rim, Joran stood before the broadcast podium. Behind him, representatives from what used to be fractured nations now wore the same insignia, a gray triangle inside a ring of black stars. The script sat on the podium. Earth's first official transstellar response. Joran didn't read it aloud. He didn't need to. Instead, he looked into the camera, into the void waiting beyond their system, and spoke with deliberate clarity. "We are not seeking war. We are not seeking alliance. But if you reach toward Earth, reach gently, because we will not meet you with silence again." Behind the glass, technicians hit record. The signal was encoded, copied, and sent on every deep-range frequency Earth could reach. In a war room still warm with recent fire, Director Merrick stepped beside Joran, nodding to the now dim screen. "What's next?" Joran didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened his palm and showed the dog tag he kept now. Not Velik's, not his son's, his own. It was scorched from the orbital blast that nearly took him during a recon launch. The name was almost unreadable. "Next," Joran said quietly, "we stop putting names on metal and start etching them into the stars." Merrick nodded slowly. "And our doctrine?" Joran looked out the wide observation window, past the debris field that had once been a death sentence, and now was a monument. "Our doctrine," he said, "is simple. The broadcast room on the lunar platform had no glass, no stage lights, no curtains to pull back. Just a matte gray floor, 2 ceiling-mounted cameras, and a reinforced comms rack pulsing with outbound signal sync. The room had been stripped of symbolism on purpose. No flags lined the wall. No global leaders flanked the podium. There were no drums, no prelude, and no declaration of war. Just a man behind a mic and a signal set to travel beyond Saul. Joran stood still, eyes not on the lens, but just above it, reading nothing. The words had been memorized days ago. "This message is not for negotiation," he began. "It is not a peace offering. It is not a threat." He paused. "For generations we asked politely. We believed that strength was measured by restraint. We waited for common ground, extended offers, listened to ultimatums, and absorbed losses we couldn't afford. We were mistaken." A long silence followed. It wasn't for effect. It was weight, one that didn't need music to be felt. "We've tried polite, now we'll try effective." He stepped back from the mic. The signal launched, compressed, amplified, and beamed in narrow-band bursts through the solar array. It would reach systems faster than probes ever could. It didn't carry hope. It carried proof. Not of survival, of calculation. 3 days after the signal was sent, one of Earth's telescopes detected movement from the edge of the Helion cluster. Ships pulling away from a frontier post known to house smaller empires under Tarskin rule. They weren't preparing for attack. They were backing off. Earth didn't rebuild its cities with banners or parades. In the outskirts of what used to be Buenos Aires, workers cleared entire city blocks one panel at a time, not to erase the damage but to embed new framework beneath it. Quantum mesh networks were routed beneath reinforced concrete. Housing zones were mapped not just for population, but for structural blast buffering. Every window installed could double as an emergency shield, every streetlight as a communications uplink. No ceremony, just systems. In the command bays across Earth's defense network, orbital grids reactivated, some old, most new. The stations looked nothing like their predecessors. They didn't reflect sunlight or flash navigation strobes. They drifted cold and invisible, running hybrid propulsion systems, spliced with Dominion tech. None of them carried warheads. All of them carried eyes. Above the lunar surface, in the shadow of the crater-rich equatorial plain, the first Sentinence array was being installed. Each tower stood 15 meters high, buried 10 meters below the regolith. Passive observation lines stretched hundreds of kilometers across the station perimeter, tuned not to detect heat, but intent. Signal flux, pre-ignition resonance, fleet coordination pulses. No one spoke of retaliation anymore. Earth's plan wasn't revenge. It was readiness. Inside the main construction module, Joran reviewed the final plans for the Sentinel's orbital control link. A low buzz came from a wall-mount unit as a message packet from Geneva confirmed the new global strategic alignment protocols. Marek's voice came through on audio only. Outer Rim clusters have begun consolidating under independent banners. The Dominion hasn't made a move since the Mars Pole retreat. They're not ready to challenge again, Joran said. They need time to repair. Marek replied after a long pause. So do we. We are, Joran said. Every hour we build, we gain ground they can't see. Another silence passed. Where are you now? Joran looked through the side viewport, his breath fogging the inner layer of the helmet he hadn't removed since the last inspection round. Lunar base. Western Rim. Just checked the seismic shielding on the 4th tower. It's holding. You always did prefer silence over briefings, Mark said. It's not silence, Joran answered. It's distance. We spent too long pretending the galaxy would respect ours. At ground level, construction bots moved across the gray dust without need for command. Engineers worked beside them, drilling, soldering, installing. Joran walked past them, his boots crunching fine lunar dust, his hands at his sides. He wasn't carrying a weapon, not anymore. What hung from his wrist instead was a thin steel band, once polished, now worn smooth. On the inner edge, etched in his own hand with a carbon stylus, were 3 letters. E.D. Terran Dalton Vault. His son. There'd never been a grave, just coordinates that no longer existed. He stood at the far edge of the platform, watching Earth slowly rise along the horizon. Blue, incomplete. He closed his eyes and spoke into the vacuum of his helmet. Let them come. In the subterranean media hub, technicians finalized the archival copy of the broadcast. Ren Toll walked in, carrying a new data chip from the decryption vault. They're listening, he said without preamble. We intercepted a ping from the Darvashian relay, Third Empire, not Tarscan, different design entirely. Joran nodded. They heard it. They translated it word for word. What's their response? Toll handed him a single tablet with a returned packet. Joran scrolled once, then twice. The message was short. We misunderstood. We are reviewing your designation. He raised his head. They don't know what we are. They've never fought anything that wasn't trying to become them, Toll replied. That's not what Earth wants. No, Joran said, handing the tablet back. We're not joining anything. That's the point. In a final press report drafted for Earth's own civilian networks, the header read, Dominion fleet repelled. Earth establishes autonomous galactic doctrine. But Joran never liked the phrasing. Doctrine implied belief. This wasn't faith. It was memory. It was calculation. It was what happens when you demand surrender from a species that's only ever survived by adapting. The final record in the Sentinel archive, Entry 1, was a visual feed logged from the orbital relay station, 8 hours after the broadcast. It showed Earth rising slowly. The voice overlay was Joran's, recorded during a closed-channel address to the crew still on board the orbital build stations. "We didn't make this to be remembered," he said. "We made this so we never have to ask again. If the galaxy wants to speak, they'll find us. But they won't find us quiet. We sent no warning. We were the warning."